Welcome to today's instalment of Wolf Brother by Michelle Paver, and we are reading Chapter 9. We left Torak in a dilemma yesterday. He had just been told he was going to be killed by the clan leader who had captured him. So let's see what happens today. Chapter 9. Torak's knees buckled. "What?" he gasped. "I didn't even know the book was yours. How can I be guilty if I didn't know?" "It's the law," said Finn Kedin. "Why? Why? Because you say so?" "Because the clans say so." Oslak put a heavy hand on Torak's shoulder. "No," cried Torak. "Listen, you say it's the law, but there's another law, isn't there?" He caught his breath. "Trial by combat. We fight for it." He wasn't sure if he'd got that right. Far had only mentioned it once when he was teaching him the law of the clans, but Finn Kedin's eyes narrowed. "I'm right, aren't I?" Torak insisted, forcing himself to give the Raven leader stare for stare. "You don't know for sure if I'm guilty because you don't know whether I actually knew the book was yours, so we fight, you and me." He swallowed. "If I win, I'm innocent. I live. I mean, me and the wolf. If I lose, we die." Some of the men were chuckling. A woman tapped her brow, shaking her head. "I don't fight, boys," said Finn Kedin. "But he's right, isn't he?" said Wren. "It's the oldest law of all. He has the right to fight." Horde stepped forward. "I'll fight him. I'm closer to him in age. It'll be fairer." "Not by much," Wren said dryly. She was leaning against the tree from which Wolf was suspended. Torak saw that she'd loosened the neck of the bag a little so that Wolf's head was poking out. He looked bedraggled, but was gazing curiously down at the two dogs slavering beneath him. "What do you say, Finn Kedin?" said the Magai. "The boy's right. Let them fight." Finn Kedin met the old woman's eyes, and for a moment there seemed to be a battle of wills between them. Slowly he nodded. Relief washed over Torak. Everyone seemed to be excited by the prospect of a fight. They talked in huddles, stamping their feet, their breath steaming in the chill evening air. Oslak tossed Torak his father's knife. "You'll need that. And a spear, and an arm guard." A what?" asked Torak. The big man scratched the scar where his ear had been. "You know how to fight, don't you?" "No," said Torak. Oslak rolled his eyes. He went off to the nearest shelter and returned with an ashwood spear tipped with a vicious basalt point and what seemed to be a length of triple-thickness reindeer hide. Torak took the spear uncertainly and watched in puzzlement as Oslak strapped the toughened hide round his right forearm for him. It felt as heavy and unwieldy as a haunch of deer meat. He wondered what he was supposed to do with it. Oslak nodded at the bandage on Torak's other arm and grimaced. "Seems like the odds are against you." "Just a bit," thought Torak. When he'd suggested a fight, he'd had in mind a wrestling bout, with maybe some knife play thrown in, the sort of thing he and Far used to practice quite often, but just for fun. Clearly, to the Ravens, a fight meant something else. Torak wondered if there were special rules and whether it would look weak to ask. Finn Kedin prodded the fire, making sparks fly. Torak watched him through a shimmer of heat haze. "There's only one rule," said Finn Kedin, as if he'd guessed Torak's thoughts. "You can't use fire. Do you understand?" His eyes caught and held Torak's. Torak nodded distractedly. Not using fire was the least of his worries. Behind Finn Kedin he could see Horde having his arm guard strapped on. He had taken off his jerkin. He looked enormous and frighteningly strong. Torak decided against taking off his own jerkin. No need to emphasize the contrast. He untied everything from his belt and laid it in a pile on the ground. Then he wound a length of woven grass twine around his forehead to keep his hair out of his eyes. His hands were slippery with sweat. He stooped and rubbed them in the dust. Someone touched his shoulder, making him jump. It was Wren. She was holding out a birch bark beaker. He took it gratefully and drank. To his surprise, it was elderberry juice, tart and strengthening. Wren saw his surprise and shrugged. "Horde's had a drink. It's only fair." She pointed to a pail by the fire. "There's water when you need it." Torak handed back the beaker. "I don't think it'll last that long." She hesitated. "Who knows?" A hush fell. The watchers formed a ring around the edge of the clearing, with Torak and Horde in the middle near the fire. There were no formalities. The fight was on. Warily they circled each other. For all his size, Horde moved with the grace of a lynx, flexing his knees and repositioning his fingers on knife and spear. His face was taut, but a small smile played about his lips. He loved being the centre of attention. Torak didn't. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Dimly he could hear the watchers shouting encouragement to Horde, but their voices were muffled as if he were underwater. Horde's spear lunged for his chest, and he dodged just in time. He felt the sweat start out on his forehead. Torak tried the same move, hoping it didn't look like copying. Copying won't get you very far, called Wren. Torak's face burned. He and Horde were moving faster now. In places, the ground was slimy with boar's blood. Torak slipped and nearly went down. He knew he couldn't hope to win by force. He'd have to use his wits. The trouble was, he only knew 2 fighting tricks, and he hadn't practiced them more than a few times. Here goes, he thought recklessly. He jabbed his spear at Horde's throat. As expected, Horde's hide arm rose to block it. Torak tried a quick undercut to the belly, but Horde parried it with alarming ease, and Torak's spear slid harmlessly off his arm guard. He knew that one, thought Torak. With every move, it was becoming obvious that Horde was a seasoned fighter. Come on, Horde, yelled a man. Give him a red skin. Give me time, Horde called back with a curl of his lip. A ripple of laughter. Torak tried his second trick. Feigning total incompetence, which wasn't hard, he hit out wildly, tempting Horde with a glimpse of his unprotected chest. Horde took the bait, but as his spear came in to strike, Torak's arm guard swung across to meet it. Horde's spear point sank into the thick hide guard, nearly knocking Torak off his feet, but Torak managed to keep to his plan by twisting his arm guard sharply upwards. Torak's spear shaft snapped in two. The watchers groaned. Horde staggered back without a spear. Torak was astonished. He hadn't expected it to work. Horde recovered swiftly, lunging forwards. He jabbed his knife into Torak's spear hand. Torak cried out as the flint bit between finger and thumb. He lost his footing and dropped his spear. Horde lunged again. Torak only just managed to roll away in time and scramble to his feet. Now they were both spearless, down to their knives. To gain some breathing space, Torak dodged behind the fire. His chest was heaving and his wounded hand throbbed. Sweat was pouring down his sides. He bitterly regretted not copying Horde and taking off his jerkin. Hurry up, Horde, yelled a woman. Finish him off. Come on, Horde, shouted a man. Is this what they taught you in the deep forest? By now, not all shouts were for Horde. There was a smattering of encouragement for Torak, although he guessed it was less genuine support than pleased surprise that he was lasting longer than expected. He knew it wouldn't be much longer. He was tiring rapidly and he'd run out of tricks. Horde was taking control. Sorry, Wolf, he told the cub silently. I don't think we're going to get out of this. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed Wolf high in the tree. He was wriggling and yowling in a haze of steamy breath. What's happening? He was asking. Why won't you come and free me? Torak leapt aside to avoid a knife slash across his throat. Concentrate, he told himself grimly. Forget about Wolf. And yet, something was nagging him, something about Wolf. What was it? He glanced at Wolf, yowling in the tree, his breath steaming. You can't use fire, Finn Kedin had said. Suddenly Torak's mind flooded clear, and he knew what to do. Jabbing and feinting, he edged sideways, putting the fire between them once more. Hiding again, taunted Horde. Torak jerked his head at the birch bark water pail. I want a drink, all right? If you must, boy. Keeping his eyes on Horde, Torak squatted and cupped water to drink. He did it slowly to make Horde think that he was up to something with the water pail, and to distract attention from the cooking skin bubbling by the fire. It worked. Horde stepped closer to the fire, looming over it to intimidate Torak. You want a drink too? Said Torak, still squatting. Horde snorted his contempt. Suddenly Torak lashed out, but at the cooking skin. Jabbing his knife into the tough hide, he upended it and sent boiling broth pouring onto the white-hot embers. Hissing clouds of steam billowed into Horde's face. The watchers gasped. Torak seized his chance and jabbed at his opponent's wrist. Blinded, Horde howled in pain and dropped his knife. Torak kicked it away, then threw himself on Horde, knocking him to the ground. As Horde lay winded, Torak straddled his chest and knelt on his arms to pin them down. For one roaring heartbeat, his sight misted red, and he knew the urge to kill. He grabbed a handful of dark red hair and bashed Horde's head once against the earth. Then he felt strong hands on his shoulders, pulling him off. It's over, said Finn Kedin behind him. Torak struggled in his grip. Horde sprang up and scrambled for his knife, panting and glaring. They faced each other. I said it's over, snapped Finn Kedin. Chaos erupted amongst the watchers. They didn't think it was over at all. He cheated. He used fire. No, he won fairly enough. Who's to say? They'll have to fight it out again. Both Torak and Horde looked appalled at that. The boy won, said Finn Kedin, releasing his grip on Torak. Torak shook himself and wiped the sweat from his face as he watched Horde resheathing his knife. Horde was furious, though whether with himself or with Torak, it was impossible to tell. Durati put her hand on his arm, but he shook it off angrily and pushed his way through the others, disappearing into one of the shelters. Now that the bloodlust had left him, Torak felt shaky and sick. He sheathed his knife and looked round for his things. Then he saw Finn Kedin watching him. "You broke the rule," said the Raven leader calmly. "You used fire." "No, I didn't," said Torak. He sounded a lot more confident than he felt. "I didn't use fire. I used steam." "I would have preferred it," said Finn Kedin, "if you'd used water instead of broth. That was a waste of good food." Torak did not reply. Finn Kedin studied him, and for a moment there was a gleam of humour in his blue eyes. Oslap pushed through to them, with the bag containing Wolf in his arms. "Here's that cub of yours," he boomed, tossing the bag at Torak with a force that made him stagger. Wolf squirmed and licked Torak's chin and told him how awful it had been all at once. Torak wanted to say something comforting but stopped himself. It would be stupid to slip up now. "The law's the law," Finn Kedin said briskly. "You won, you're free to go." "No," a girl's voice rang out, and all heads turned. It was Wren. "You can't let him go," she cried, running forward. "He just has," retorted Torak. "You heard him. I'm free." Wren spoke to her uncle. "We can't let him go. This is too important. He might be—" She drew Finn Kedin aside, whispering urgently. Torak couldn't make out what she was saying, but to his dismay, others drew closer to listen. The Mage scowled and nodded. Even Horde emerged from the shelter, and when he heard what they were saying, he gave Torak a strange, wary stare. Finn Kedin studied Wren thoughtfully. "Are you sure about this?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. We need time to find out." Finn Kedin stroked his beard. "What makes you suspect?" "The way he defeated Horde, and I found this in his things." She held out her palm, and Torak saw his little grouse-bone whistle. "What do you use it for?" she asked him. "For calling the cub," he replied. She blew on it, and Wolf twisted in his arms. A shiver of unease ran through the crowd. Wren and Finn Kedin exchanged glances. "Doesn't make any noise," she said accusingly. Torak did not reply. He realized with a jolt that her eyes were not light blue like her brother's, but black as a peat pool. He wondered if she was a Mage too. She turned to Finn Kedin. "We can't let him go till we know for sure." "She's right," said the Mage. "You know what it says as well as I do. Everyone does." What says?" pleaded Torak. "Finn Kedin, we had a pact. We agreed that if I won the fight, me and Wolf would go free." "No," said Finn Kedin. "We agreed that you would live, and so you shall, at least for now. Oslak, tie him up again." "No!" shouted Torak. Wren raised her chin. "You said your father was killed by a bear. We know about that bear. Some of us have even seen it." Beside her, Horde shuddered and began to gnaw his thumbnail. "About a moon ago it came," Wren went on quietly. "Like a shadow it darkened the forest, killing wantonly, even killing other hunters, wolves, a lynx. It was as if it was searching for something." She paused. "Then 13 days ago it disappeared. A runner from the Boar clan tracked it south. We thought it had gone. We gave thanks to our clan guardian." She swallowed. "Now it's back. Yesterday our scouts returned from the west. They'd found many kills, right down to the sea. The Whale clan told them that 3 days ago it took a child." Torak licked his lips. "What's this got to do with me?" "There's a prophecy in our clan," said Wren, as if he hadn't spoken. "A shadow attacks the forest. None can stand against it." She broke off, frowning. The Mage took up her words. "Then comes the listener. He fights with air and speaks with silence." Her gaze fell on the whistle in Wren's hand. Everyone was silent, watching Torak. "I'm not your listener," he said. "We think you might be," replied the Mage. Torak thought about the prophecy. The listener fights with air. He had done just that. He had used steam. "What happens to him?" he asked in a low voice. "What happens to the listener in the prophecy?" But he had a terrible feeling that he already knew. The silence in the clearing grew more intense. Torak looked from the frightened faces around him to the flint knife at Oslak's belt. He looked at the glistening carcass of the boar hanging from the tree, at its dark blood trickling into the pail beneath. He felt Finn Kedin's eyes on him and turned to face the burning blue gaze. "The listener," quoted Finn Kedin, "gives his heart's blood to the mountain, and the shadow is crushed." His heart's blood. Under the tree, the blood dripped softly into the basin. Drip, drip, drip.